procurement isn't everybody's favorite department to work with because we seem to put up more roadblocks and make their jobs more challenging. But we're really just trying to help navigate the process to ensure that the project runs smoothly. It's really just to set the table for a successful project in the future, not just because we like saying no.
Welcome to An Entrepreneur's Vibes, the podcast that gives insight into the minds of visionary entrepreneurs and business leaders. Brought to you by The Right Direction, the leading professional and technical writing company based in North America. Each episode, we explore the stories and experiences of those who dared to dream, took the leap, and built their own empires. Today, we're excited to bring you a special episode featuring one of the incredible individuals we connected with at the FAPO conference. That's the Florida Association of Public Procurement Officials, where The Right Direction was proudly invited this year. Through this segment, we're shining a light on the world of government procurement, an often overlooked but incredibly essential part of governance, ethics, and public service. Whether you're a student considering a future in public service, a professional curious about procurement, or just someone who wants to learn about the systems that make our communities run, this episode is for you. Today, we're joined by a leader in public procurement whose career is built on strategy, service, and innovation. Our guest is the Procurement Assistant Director in the office of St. Lucie, Florida, with a track record that spans positions as procurement supervisor, procurement official, and purchasing program manager. He brings years of expertise in navigating complex purchasing processes that keep city operations running smoothly. Certified as both a NIGP, CPP, and CPPO, our guest is not only committed to excellence in procurement, but also to fostering best practices and professional development in the field. His work is a testament to how thoughtful leadership and a solutions-focused mindset can make a lasting impact on communities. Today, we'll dive into his career journey, lessons learned, and insights for anyone looking to thrive in procurement or public service. Welcome to the show, Nathaniel Rubel.
Hi, thanks for having me. Certainly excited to talk about this. Like you said, it's often an overlooked function of municipal government, but one that, is faced increased scrutiny and is becoming more and more key in helping the organizations make decisions on projects. So happy to be here.
Absolutely. We're so glad to have you. Please, could you walk us through how you got started in the field of procurement?
Sure, absolutely. I would think if you ask this question to anybody, they would say that they just kind of ended up here or landed there. And I don't think there's that many people who start out with their goal, initially end up in public procurement. But so I think my story is probably somewhat similar to maybe some others if you ask this question to other procurement officials. So I had worked in construction as a cost estimator and project managers for some large commercial general contractors. And in that role, it was important to pay close attention to detail, reading blueprints, paying attention to market trends and pricing, assuring you're getting an adequate number of quotes to ensure you're getting good pricing, and paying close attention to details of the blueprints, but also the contract language as well. And then with managing contracts, seeing the work carried out. Well, living in Port St. Lucie, Florida, we were acutely affected by the economic downturn in what people call the Great Recession. So construction being a trailing indicator to some of those troubles in the market. I was working on a lot of projects, late into 2011, 2012, and did not see a whole lot of work coming up locally after that. So I made a couple decisions at that time. First, I decided, during this downturn, I decided to go back to school and get my master's degree in business administration. I figured during that downturn, I didn't know what was in store, but I thought, it might not be a bad time to invest in myself. And then being someone who likes to keep busy, it was very difficult to go to work and try to make, tasks for myself, things to do. And so I looked at other options. And I found a role with the local utility authority as their purchasing program manager, and felt I could a lot of the skills I had learned on the job as an estimator and project manager, I could translate to work in the public sector, overseeing the procurement operations for the utility. I had bid many government projects as a contractor, so I already knew the process from the other side, so I felt that I was well positioned to facilitate the process from within the government agency. So
Well,
that's kind of how I got to public procurement.
you're absolutely right. I've had the privilege of talking to other procurement officials, and they do say the same thing. It's not necessarily a career that they envisioned themselves to be in, but found themselves to be in it anyway. And I think it's a really fascinating story. But I wanted to ask you, what has kept you passionate about this career?
So no, that's a good question. I think what that last part when I said I had bid many government projects, during my experience bidding some of these projects, I felt that maybe sometimes the process wasn't always fair. And maybe that was maybe I had the wrong perception, but I felt, it seemed like the same contractors getting the work over and over again. It seemed like when I would walk into some of these pre-bid meetings or bid openings that it seemed like there was some relationships already established that may have gotten in the way of facilitating a process. I'm not necessarily accusing anything of that. It's just the perception. I felt, I didn't like that perception because it's going to turn off a lot of bidders from even wanting to participate because they may think they don't have a chance in what's supposed to be an open and fair public process. That's what keeps me passionate. I want to facilitate, a procurement process that is fair and open. And I know it's not always going to go, everybody's way, but at least at the end, if somebody wants a debrief, I can certainly explain the process to them and show them that we did facilitate a fair process. Because we're transparent, we keep all of our documentations, we document the decisions we make and follow the laws.
Absolutely. And, I have a lot of questions about how you do facilitate those processes. But looking back at some of your earlier roles, what were some of the most defining moments that shaped your career?
What's helping me today was probably right out of college as a construction cost estimator. I did learn a lot. I learned a lot about deadlines on projects, and the importance of doing things timely and how priorities can change. And sometimes you're up against some tight deadlines and the need to figure out how to meet those deadlines. Also, the attention to detail that you have to have when reading not only project plans, but also the contracts and specifications. There oftentimes are terms and conditions contained within those documents that may make a significant impact on decisions you need to make when pricing a project up or the facilitating of a contract or what questions to ask to get those things clarified so you're not held to things that really are shouldn't have been in the contract in the first place. Looking at project conditions, assessing risk, and then it's helped me develop some experience with how to read the contracts, what to look for, what to anticipate, and maybe what points I can negotiate and how to save the agency money.
And could you please share how has your role evolved since you first started working in procurement?
Well, I was working for Fort Pierce Utilities Authority, which is it's a smaller municipal utility that had just decided to take their procurement operations in-house from the city. And I'd say, for a smaller agency like that, you kind of can operate a little bit more in the shadows. But what I'm seeing now is increased scrutiny on the public procurement operation when things may go wrong on a contract. Oftentimes, the procurement operations or the procurement process might be brought into question as well. So it's just, basically ensuring you have good processes in place, can document and justify decisions that were made and keep good records. So when you are questioned, you can you do have the right answers, or at least can explain what had transpired, because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. There's going to be something that comes up that you're going to need to have all this information to explain the procurement of that particular contract when it comes up.
That's really fascinating because I would expect that if certain services weren't fulfilled, that it would fall more on the vendor. But if I'm understanding correctly, it would mostly fall on the procurement department if things didn't go as planned.
Yeah, partly. It's a shared responsibility of managing these contracts. Obviously, we rely on, I can speak for currently the city of Port St. Lucie. We're a central procurement office, so we do rely heavily on subject matter experts within the respective departments. So we are relying on them to be managing and overseeing their projects, but then communicating with us when performance issues arise, so we can get involved at that point to utilize the provisions within the contract to help manage that performance. And when all of us aren't working together on that, then yeah, things can go awry, and maybe procurement gets, maybe it's more than its share of the blame, but it's just part of being, communicating with all the stakeholders to ensure the projects run smoothly.
That's totally understandable. And thank you for that insight. I just wanted to ask this section because we might have a lot of listeners out there who would love to know what kind of education or certifications they would need to be in procurement. So I know you both hold a bachelor's in business administration and an MBA. How would you say has those degrees contributed to your career in procurement?
I would say going through the education at the college and graduate level, that doesn't necessarily give you the experience you need on the job, but it does get you familiar with commonly used business terms and concepts. I'd say the business law classes I've taken were particularly helpful because in procurement we do do a lot of contract management, and we write the contracts and even draft them before we solicit for those services. So being familiar with the legal terms and the clauses within the contracts is important. At the graduate level, the curriculum kind of shifted to required a different level of thinking. You were required to think maybe how the leadership of your organization would think and how they'd manage those types of problems from a higher level, and then also, personnel management as well. So I'd say all those things combined kind of got you introduced to some of the concepts you'll face on the job, but certainly doesn't replace, the learning you'll do on the job.
And what would you say are the most valuable lessons in business that you've learned from your time at the University of Florida and Florida State University?
The curriculum, of course, being centered around business concepts, anywhere from economics. Think about what we're experienced or we have experienced post-COVID with port closures, now with threats of tariffs. We have to be familiar with the economics of the situation. Business law classes, knowing what makes up a contract, being familiar with what the different terms and conditions in the contract are, learning how to negotiate those contracts. Even the accounting classes, learning, that you need to have, proper invoices and things like to account for the payments made on contracts. I think just that business curriculum gets you familiar with the terms that you'll face in the business world, even in the government business world. So you're not caught off guard. You should be familiar with a lot of these concepts that are going to come up. Plus, it kind of gives you a broader perspective when it comes to management, marketing, economics, accounting, finance, business law, so that whatever comes across your desk, you're not going to necessarily be a subject matter expert on anything, but you'll have a broad enough experience where you can read the scopes of work and read the contracts and understand some of it and know how to find out information on the things that you don't understand, know where to go.
And you've earned both the NIGP, CPP, and CPPO certifications. What advice would you give someone preparing to take these certification exams?
First, you want to tailor your education within public procurement around the subject, the topics that are part of the body of knowledge for those tests. So you want to make sure you're prepared and learning that information that you'll be tested on. And I think both exams do a very good job of identifying those areas. So, and then the coursework that goes along with it, I think it even explains, okay, this will be, pertinent to this area of the body of knowledge. This course will be pertinent to that area. So make sure you're strategic with your training as you prepare. And then I would recommend when you feel you're ready, take some of those practice exams that are offered in the various courses, see how you do, see if, and take a prep course. I took a prep course that was quite helpful because it gave you additional resources like additional prep exams. So take those, find out the areas that you're weak in, and really focus on those. There's a gentleman who's known by a lot of people in the public procurement world. His name's David Nash. He has a service called the Question of the Day. I think that has even been, I think he's partnering with someone else to create a more formal platform in which he issues the question of the day. So I would recommend signing up for that. And then I would say, obviously study, you can join study groups, but don't get caught up applying agency specific solutions. You need to think about why our agency does it that way based on the training that and the fundamentals that we all would share in the public procurement, why we do what we do. So don't get caught up in agency specific solutions, but more broadly as to why a public procurement professional would make a certain decision.
Thank you for that valuable advice. Are there any professional organizations or conferences or even networking opportunities that have helped you grow in the field of procurement?
Absolutely. I think in public procurement, it's there's a lot of rules. A lot of people do things differently. There's laws we have to follow. So, being able to bounce those ideas off your peers is certainly important. And I found, you know, the FAPO conference is a great conference. Now that's for Florida, and that's I think one of the better state conferences on public procurement. But even joining your local NIGP chapter, I've found that to be helpful. It gives you an idea to network with people in public procurement, to find out, is how are other agencies doing? Am I on the right plane there? Am I doing things right, or is there something that we need to change? And I think what you find out is a lot of us are struggling with some of the same issues. So it's good to bounce those ideas off of colleagues and kind of let you know that you're doing okay, that as long as you're holding those fundamental concepts, trying to facilitate a fair, ethical, open process, you're probably on the right path. You might just be doing it a little different than somebody else, but at least, your heart is in the right place with why you're doing what you're doing.
Mhm. I did hear because our representative, it was our first time joining FAPO this year, did tell me, and as I've known from speaking with other procurement officials, that it is a way for other procurement officials to talk to each other, not just like find new vendors or find new bidders for some of their projects. But since you brought it up, you did say that it's a way for you to understand and kind of learn that you go through some of the same challenges. Could you give us some insight about some of those challenges?
Sure. I mean, the legal, landscape around public procurement is constantly changing. For example, this year there was several laws that went into effect July 1st that we were preparing for, such as how we are to handle processing of change orders on construction projects here in the state of Florida. There was also legislation passed several years ago about how to conduct a selection process for our external auditors. So we can discuss, new developments in the public procurement profession, how we're handling them, and help others. If somebody's already navigated a process, well, it's nice to hear from them to see how they did it, because if they had success, then I can replicate their process and hopefully be assured of success as well. That's really one of the benefits of meeting with our colleagues at these events, because we can learn how to facilitate processes better and really provide a better product to the taxpayers, to facilitate an open, fair process in accordance with the laws.
And could you please share what's one habit or learning practice that's been a game changer for your ongoing professional development?
It's more broad than that. It's just being open to continuous learning. For example, there was a project that I was working on that didn't have as desirable of an outcome. The outcome wasn't the optimal outcome. Well, I took that as an opportunity that, hey, maybe I needed to educate myself a bit more on that type of project, that type of process. I think so. It's just being open to finding those continuous learning. Maybe it's just bolstering knowledge you already have, being up to date with changes in the legal landscape surrounding public procurement, or identifying areas of weakness to be able to deliver a successful project in the future. So really, it's just that there's just so much to learn, and it's exciting to learn new things. So to me, that's the biggest thing that's been helpful to me, is because I've had to learn a lot to go from the different roles, and from a municipal utility to a city government. But then also on the certifications, you have to learn a lot of the public procurement concepts to be ready to test for those. So you need to prepare yourself with that. And then there's other certifications, like, for example, I achieved a Associate Design Build Association because our agency is going to be endeavoring to deliver more collaborative projects using design build or construction manager at risk. So I wanted to make sure I had the knowledge and skills I needed to be successful in delivering those projects. So, find what you're interested in, and just learn as much as you can about it.
Hmm. I definitely resonate with that. And if you really want to get better at any career, you have to be willing to keep on learning. That does resonate. And I believe a lot of our listeners will as well. And while we're at the topic of giving advice for aspiring procurement professionals, for someone who is considering this as a career, what would you say are some of the skills or traits that you believe are essential for them to thrive?
We need to be obviously subject matter experts in public procurement, but we're not subject matter experts unless we're in a central procurement office on the topics. So we need to kind of be a jack of all trades, so to speak. Try to draw parallels between, maybe you could facilitate the procurement process for one thing, and then the next project you think is totally unrelated, but drawing parallels to maybe some contract provisions that were helpful in this contract, or what you could anticipate are some potential areas of concern based on the scope of work you're reading that you draw on past experience. So, each project can be related and build off one another, even if they're not for the same exact thing. So it's you're paying that close attention to detail, when you're reading scopes of work, reading contracts, and you need to, take the perspective of all the different stakeholders, right? There's a procurement process, so that's where we are, applying our knowledge as a subject matter experts on that. But then we have to sort of put on some other hats for at least to consider where they're coming from, such as your project managers, the proposers or bidders that are interested in the project. You need to look at it from their perspective too. Are we providing clear instruction on how to participate in this opportunity? And then, being able to work with that whole range of stakeholders, right? You might need to get insight on the scope of work from those doing work in the field, right? And then you also need to take into consideration the perspective from city leadership or your agency's leadership and those elected officials. So you really need to learn how to communicate with all levels of stakeholders to make the project run smoothly, because you're sort of in the middle facilitating that process. So you have to anticipate all the needs of those stakeholders.
So earlier you did share your journey of how you started in construction and found yourself in procurement. How would you advise a young professional to get their foot in the door in the public procurement sector?
First thing, I think it's a positive attitude and positive energy can go a long way. We've interviewed many candidates over the last few years as the city of Port St. Lucie's been growing. We've needed to expand our team, and that's one thing that's just really infectious, is a great positive attitude. You want to bring someone with that type of energy on board who's willing to solve problems, figuring, hey, while I'm at work, let's make the most of what I could do. Where can I add value? So you want to look for people with that enthusiasm and that type of attitude. You need to also have a servant mentality, right? We're in we're in government, so we're in public service. So we need to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars. So you have to have that servant mentality. We're an internal service function, right? So we need to also serve our customers, which is going to be all the stakeholders that I, previously mentioned. What's been helpful to me is, with the candidates we've interviewed is if they do a little research beforehand to learn a little bit about procurement. I know they're not going to have all the right answers, but just having some thoughtful answers and showing that they've done a little research, not only on the agency, but the agency's procurement process as well is helpful. It lets us know, communicates with us that they're interested in the job and looking to to learn on how to do the work. So I'd say a little bit of knowledge goes a long way if you do a little research on public procurement beforehand.
Thank you. That's really valuable advice. And what would you say are some common misconceptions people have about procurement as a profession?
That we always say no, or that we don't add value to the organization. Sometimes procurement isn't everybody's favorite department to work with because we seem to put up more roadblocks and make their jobs more challenging. But so I think that's a common misconception. We're really just trying to help navigate the process, and we feel that doing a little bit of that extra work up front is going to ensure that the project runs smoothly. So you won't have to, jeopardize, a whole several months you've put into a project by it being thrown out because of something that was overlooked or because we didn't follow the process correctly and we have to start over. So it's really just to set the table for a successful project in the future, not just because we like saying no.
And what kind of mindset should someone adopt if they want to succeed in government procurement or succeed in just becoming a public servant?
Reiterate the servant mentality, of course. We're in public service when we work for public organizations. Process-oriented thinking, I think, is helpful for procurement because while we don't produce like a tangible good, we still have processes that are dictated by, the laws, whether they're local laws, federal laws, state laws, and then our policies and procedures to help us, kind of carry out the law. So I think understanding the process is helpful, why you're doing what you're doing, making sure that you're adding value at each step along the way because of the duties that we're charged with, ensuring that there's not redundant steps or repeated steps, plus at the end of the day, everybody's trying to see how quickly things can get done. So if you have a process mentality, you understand each of the steps along the way and what's required and the commitment that the time commitment that is required to navigate the steps of the procurement process. And then, looking at things from different perspectives, all your stakeholders, be mindful that you should probably look at things from those different perspectives to get a better understanding of the project as a whole.
And what have been some of the most significant challenges or like an overarching theme of hurdles you've faced throughout your procurement career?
It's really just trying to pay that close attention to detail. When a new project comes across your desk, it's important to dive in and really learn as much as you can about some of the more intricate details because that's where you can, apply the different perspectives to anticipate any potential pitfalls where they may lay. I think what was really hard to get over was operating in what I would perceive to be the gray area. And off the top, that sounds scary. But what you'll learn in procurement is there's not a one size fits all answer to every problem you face. And sometimes, even as you apply the laws, the policies, and procedures, it may still not render it to be able to fit neatly into the box you want to place it in. So you may operate in some of the gray area, but I think as long as you document your thought process, the decision process you're making, why you made the decisions you made, you're really not operating in the gray area. You're just documenting the thought process. So when someone does come back and look at it, they can see a well-reasoned decision was made in accordance with the laws and the policies. But it's a little scary to operate in that area. So you have to get a little comfortable with that, in public procurement.
Mhm. Earlier, you did share that a misconception people might have about the procurement department is that they always say no. Could you share an instance of a tough procurement decision that you had to make, and how did you approach that?
I think it involves, just getting out ahead of it. I think we all, need to, there needs to be some self-accountability, right? So if you by chance did, make a mistake, sometimes you need to own up to that. So getting out ahead of things you see, communicating properly. I think when you don't do those things, that's when you're setting up, an even bigger problem. If you notice something wrong, I would address it as soon as you can. Maybe walk through the different options and then what the outcomes might be under those options, and then choose, what the best outcome would be, and go from there. But I think it's really just about setting that expectation up front. You can operate under promise and over deliver, but I think setting realistic expectations to all your stakeholders is going to set it up for, a key for the project to go smoothly. I mean, on one project, the elected officials really thought that there was on a construction project that ground was going to be breaking in the near future, and the design hadn't even been started. So it was really about telling the department, hey, let's work through a realistic time frame with all the steps and the time that it takes to get through these steps, so we can deliver a realistic expectation to those concerned, and let's stick to it, right? Let's meet regularly. Let's see how we're progressing on the schedule. And that actually, that initial conversation was difficult because I had to reset that expectation, which was the reality was way different than that. But then once we worked through it from there, the project ran smoothly, and it really set up for knowing what everybody needed to do, holding everybody kind of accountable with what their responsibilities were, really made the project a success.
And as a leader, how do you inspire or motivate your team, especially during high pressure projects?
I try to, let them know that I'm there for support, that, a lot of times they see what we do. We talk through the challenges that we face together. I don't know the answer to everything. I actually rely on my team members to help talk through a lot of the challenges we face. So I just want to let them know that I'm there for them, that the rest of the team's there for them, that we've got checks and balances in place. We have checkpoints, right? As we facilitate a project through the process. We try to set them up for success in order to review the information at those key checkpoints. So they're not going to be set up for any surprises or failure. I also then, try to keep, motivating them throughout. But then at the end of it, I do love to publicly acknowledge the success that they had, navigating all the challenges that they face along the way. It's really valuable to complete the project because all those challenges that you navigate are what sets you up. If once you've, overcome a challenge, it's a lot easier to face a similar challenge in the future. So I love to acknowledge their success because I think it reinforces that they can do difficult things. So I'd like them to know that they have it within them to overcome those challenges. So I really like to acknowledge those in our public, in our weekly or monthly meetings when we get together. So I certainly encourage that. And then whenever they're acknowledged by another department for providing great service or complimented, I certainly make sure I bring that to everybody's attention, just to let them know. I don't want to bring up the negative stuff. I want to, bring up the positive things to help hopefully, generate some momentum with people trying to provide excellent service and do the right thing.
I believe that providing positive reinforcement as a leader is a very important thing. So it's great to hear that. Thank you. Now, I did want to ask some questions about innovation and trends and processes in procurement. Could you please share a procurement process that you think could be further streamlined or improved?
Overall, I think it's when there's some subjective, selection methods. I think taking some of the subjectivity out of them is helpful, like on requests for proposals, requests for qualifications. I think specifically in Florida, I think sometimes it's a challenging process to, to navigate and facilitate would be the selection of like professional services, which we're considering consultants such as architects, engineers, those types of services. We do a lot of work on trying to refine that process. And I think at every stop I've been at, it's one of the more heavily scrutinized processes by the stakeholders. So, being able to, I guess, remove some of the subjectivity. You're not going to remove it all to set clear expectations on what's evaluated and how we're evaluating it is helpful. So trying to refine those processes and make them more systematic.
And what type of procurement strategy or approach do you think tends to be most effective in public service?
I'd say being proactive, not reactive, because if something unanticipated comes up, it may not necessarily be our fault, but if we could have had something to do with, being proactive and anticipating something, that's always going to be helpful. We also need to be our own advocate. We need to do what we say we're going to do, but then we need to find ways to promote the value we bring because nobody else is going to do that for us. So I think we meet regularly with our key stakeholders. We try to get out in front of them, be proactive by letting them know of changes in laws, providing trainings for them, and then celebrating that we do provide these trainings for them. Letting leadership know that we are, trying to help all the stakeholders out learn more about procurement and just trying to celebrate that. We even host an event that we bring stakeholders within the agency and our colleagues at other agencies for Procurement Month because that's a time we can celebrate what procurement does, but get face to face with our colleagues and then with the key stakeholders we work with. So it's not just you're a name behind an email or the face on a Teams meeting. You're actually someone who can be interactive with a real person. I just think that, really just trying to be proactive in how you navigate those relationships is extremely helpful.
Has there been an instance where a certain procurement decision didn't go as planned? And if so, what would you have changed about that decision-making process?
I mean, that happens all the time. Not on every project, but on many of them. Speaking on one particular project isn't, I could explain what went wrong, but I think it's more about how we react to what happened than necessarily what happened. Because if you didn't expect it to happen, I'm not sure what necessarily could have been done if you felt that you had been properly prepared. But I would say own up to, the mistakes, bring them to the attention as early as you need to and let the appropriate people know. But then after that, I think you need to reflect and understand, what went wrong and what now faced with that similar situation, now you could do differently with that knowledge so it doesn't happen again. But I would say don't beat yourself up over it too much, but use it as an opportunity because that opportunity could could certainly pay off in the future. It could be learning of a real life lesson, and now you understand fully the concept, which helps you pass the CPPB exam. I mean, so everything's a learning opportunity if you look at it from that perspective.
I wanted to ask, how are you able to balance cost savings with the need for quality in procurement?
I think you have to have kind of an open mind about it. Listen to the department who the project is for, hearing what they have to say about if it's a project they usually have year after year and it's up for a rebid, find out what went good, what they'd like to improve, find out what their pain points are. There's all sorts of new ways of project delivery that people are considering. So I'd say you need to open your mind up to those. There could be incentive-based contracts, results-driven contracting, which would structure the contract for an improved outcome. So if there's an opportunity for that, be open-minded to exploring those options. Look at some of the more collaborative approaches. We've looked at like design build and construction manager at risk as an opportunity to be more collaborative, I think. And this may not even be unique to a city growing so quickly as the city of Port St. Lucie, but just the complexity, the increased complexity of the world we live in, whether it's IT or how how things are constructed. So I think you need to be more open-minded to some of those collaborative approaches and not necessarily saying, well, we always have done it this way, because there may be new ideas that you can achieve better outcomes with, would hopefully lead you to cost savings. And then, perform that due diligence, right? And be unapologetic about it. If you need to check references and have some of those uncomfortable conversations, it's just, it's what you need to do to ensure we're getting the best value for our dollars.
And earlier, you did say how important it is to have fair processes in procurement. Do you have specific frameworks or a set of metrics you use when evaluating suppliers or making those decisions?
Yeah, we do, but it's not necessarily a one size fits all approach. I mean, it depends on the work being done. I think the level of due diligence you need to take, varies from project to project. If we've seen a competitive bid processing where the low bidder is a familiar entity, there may not be as much due diligence that we need to do to ensure that they're a responsible contractor to do the work. But I'd say it's performing that due diligence, do those reference checks, review the scope with the contractors that you're considering making award to. I think, and do that with the subject matter expert or the project manager, because they're oftentimes the ones who are overseeing the work. It may be a service contract that your agency's had for a number of years, so they're very familiar with how the work is carried out. So ensuring that you review that scope and with the contractors before signing the contract, that way you can identify any gaps in their proposal. And I'd say asking for the right qualifications, making sure that what you're asking for makes sense. The key to future success is one indicator is past performance and past success. It's not, going to make it always happen, but that's one key area in which you can be somewhat assured, for likely success if somebody's had success with it in the past. So ask for the right qualifications to assess their qualifications, that they do have the right qualifications, the right experience to do the work.
And are there any tools or technologies that you wish you had to make procurement tasks easier? Perhaps there are some software or platforms that you think are essential for procurement, or how do you see technology evolving in the next few years?
So I'd say some resources we'd like more of are, more templates for if you can distill your operation down into some key areas and create templates and establish standardized processes for those items, that's going to potentially automate some of those tasks that you do. It's going to make it easy. It's going to establish some consistency. So I'd say working on ways to do that for as many things as you can where it makes sense is key. Technology has changed. I'd say in the last, maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, there was some e-procurement resources out there, and I had reviewed some of them, but the people promoting those programs and platforms didn't necessarily speak the same language we did as public procurement professionals. I think the industry's come a long way now where there's probably several good e-procurement contract management platforms that, can, consider the government, the public procurement perspective. They speak our language now. They know the processes that we have to take, that they're governed by laws and our policies and procedures. So they're aware of that, and that we have to be fair and open in our processes. So I think there's a lot of good resources out there now. I'd say, if you're still accepting hard copy bids, really strongly consider going to one of these electronic platforms where you can, receive your bids and proposals electronically, but they can also help you draft those documents a lot more efficiently and effectively, and also help you with your standardization version control, which is important. I'd say in the future, like it's going to be interesting, but I think, injecting AI into key areas of the public procurement process, whether it's to automate tasks, performs advanced analysis, whether it's on, a bid evaluation, if you have a bid with many line items, you can use you don't have to have an Excel wizard in your office. You can use embedded AI tools to help evaluate those bids. They can all, you know, you can also it can also evaluate the committee approach, like on a request for proposal or request for qualifications. That might help you evaluate, you know, if you're outside any standard deviation for, you know, how your committee voted. It can help you, you know, come up with like an aggregate scorecard or a consensus scorecard, but it can help you navigate that process as well. Yeah, I'd say so automating tasks, you know, whatever it can do to help us automate things that don't necessarily require original specific thought to that specific project is going to be helpful. Anything we can do to speed things up, but not lose quality in the work we do.
hmm Thank you. That's really insightful. And since you brought it up, the topic of AI on the vendor side, have you ever had an instance where you believe an RFP was submitted and was possibly generated with the use of AI? What's your take on that? Do you think that's ethical? Do those kinds of RFPs have a chance to even win a certain bid?
I don't know if I've seen one myself, but it's an interesting question because as you learn about, you know, the iterative prompts you can give to an AI platform with, you know, perhaps how to negotiate a contract or how to respond to an RFP, they can help you do that. I would say the same rules or not rules, but the same things apply. And you don't want to put it on autopilot too much because I think you'll overlook the specifics that the agency is looking for. And so I think, you know, even from that perspective, I think if it can automate some of the things they do, sure. But if it's going to overlook some of the areas in which they can highlight the specific experience or the specific unique value they add, they'd be probably putting themselves in a worse position to be awarded the work if they, you know, don't look at it at the specifics on how it relates to their company's offerings.
In your opinion, what would make a vendor stand out during the selection process? Perhaps there's something in their RFP that really stands out to you.
There's a number of things, and we can make some of them, you know, just jump right out at you right off the page, or if they're doing a presentation, they really are very obvious at times. Yeah, I think at first is addressing the criteria in the solicitation documents. Hopefully, the solicitation document that was issued was well thought out and is requesting pertinent information in order to make that decision. If not, ask the questions, right, to clarify that scope and that criteria. But I think if you miss it or avoid it, then, you know, that's going to be obvious to those reviewing it. Reading the documents clearly and following instructions. It's not something we like to do, and it does make us uncomfortable, but oftentimes the inability to follow the instructions may lead us to think, well, is that how it's going to be if you were awarded the contract? Are you not going to be a good partner? Are you not going to follow instructions? Are you not going to communicate well? So that right there can cause concern how it's going to be working with them when they get the job. So I think also one thing I see is potential bidders, proposers establishing themselves more as a partner, an extension of what we do, not as an adversary. You know, I don't think you want to enter into a contractual relationship with a, you know, me against you, us against them mentality. I think it's trying to find you know, ways to work together to solve the challenges. Another thing that might stick out is lack of cohesion within the organization. If there's awkward interactions and things like that, it doesn't seem like maybe they're all on the same page. That sometimes can be a kind of something that raises those your antennas go up as to maybe you're seeing that things aren't as cohesive as you think they should be within the organization. And I'd say don't be complacent, right? Especially if you've, obviously, if you've done work for that agency before, don't just assume that you are guaranteed or entitled to continuing that work. I think it's, you know, if it's a relationship you value, I think you need to show that you value that relationship with your interactions, with your proposal, with the presentations, and just, you know, the attitude and the desire, the hunger to chase the work. It should shine through that you're not being complacent. You value that relationship.
Thank you for that. And what's one thing you wish bidders or vendors did with their RFPs to make the procurement process smoother?
Following the instructions, asking questions if they do have questions. I think one of the most frustrating things is getting questions, someone might call after the bid or RFP is closed and ask the question. And it's like that question would have been very helpful to ask while the project was active because it could have made some key clarifications that could have helped us make a better decision because maybe we weren't asking for the right information. Maybe we described the project incorrectly where it was vague or would lead itself to multiple responses that differ too much in order for us to make that decision. So yeah, communicating throughout the solicitation process, but also, reading the information, paying attention to those details, because oftentimes if you don't do it, it could be too late to make the change. It could also lead to extended contract negotiations, which can get frustrating because oftentimes when we put those projects out there, we're already under pressure as to when are you going to get started? When's the contract going to be signed? So shortening the contract negotiation period by reading, ensuring the scope's right, reading the contract beforehand to ensure you can agree to those terms or what terms you want to discuss, will help quicken that up.
Thank you for, making us privy to some of these procurement processes. Just before we end, I did have more questions about your career philosophy. So, could you share an instance or the most rewarding moments of your career as a public servant so far?
I don't think it's necessarily one moment. Certainly, getting the master's degree and the certification, sure, those were all good moments. But I think what's even more satisfying and fulfilling is taking the time to reflect every so often and realizing that incremental progress you make, whether it's daily, weekly, monthly, looking back at 6 months or a year to really realize what that persistent hard work can really do. I mean, you can make some really, really significant changes, and that's what I like looking back on. Let's say you're implementing a new e-procurement suite, or you're changing your agency's policy and procedure manual, you're making updates to your procurement ordinance. That all takes months and months of work. And so when you're in the thick of it, it's not that fun sometimes. It can be frustrating. But then when you look back on those wins, I think it's really fulfilling to learn that, wow, we were working together with people, we can really accomplish I did add value in this area and we made improvements and I was part of that. I think that's the most fulfilling part of working in public procurement and not really a moment to reflect on, but just, what you can accomplish, when you put your mind to it.
And has there been a project that you're particularly proud of during your time in Port St. Lucie?
Probably implementing improved processes. We went through a lengthy analysis where we looked at our processes, we mapped them, we looked for unnecessary steps or duplicate steps, established service level expectations for those steps. It enabled us to get the buy-in we needed to update and implement technology into our process. And then now that allows us to, we're getting there, generate more reports, manage our work better based on the priorities that the agency has. It enables us to be more consistent and professional. So I think it's kind of like a snowball effect. You make some of these improvements, it leads you to be able to make additional improvements and sometimes gets you that support you need to continue doing it because people like the results they're seeing. So they're going to entrust you with additional resources to make additional improvements. So I think that's probably the thing I would be most proud of is making those process improvements. While we at the City of Port St. Lucie accepted electronic bids for a number of years, I think some of our other processes were too reliant on a paper process, and we were able to change that and make them more electronic processes.
If you could go back and give your younger self one piece of career advice, what would that be?
I'd say, things can change. So kind of keep up with things, it's just so you don't fall behind. I'd say anything you can learn, whether it's, the certifications, formal education, lessons learned through challenges, these all make you, who you are and help you navigate challenges more easily in the future or be the one that's, called upon to help navigate the challenges. I mean, that's something that nobody can take away from you, and it's something that you can truly claim as your own. All that hard work and effort you put into those things to improve yourself, that's something that nobody can take away from you. It's something unique to you. It helps you also when a less than ideal outcome occurs, to learn how to navigate that process of improving it so you don't have to be subjected to that same outcome or situation in the future. Learning new things, how to be better at what you do, you know, can be fun and it can really open your mind. I know that I've been, exposed to some new and different ideas that I think in the past, maybe I wouldn't have been as keen on, but now I'm excited to go down that path and learn new things.
Just before I let you go, one last question. What's the legacy you hope to leave behind in your procurement career?
As we started off the interview, we had talked about, some of my experience that got me to public procurement. And so what I would want to be seen as is someone who was a facilitator of a fair and open process. If someone looks back and, say, they're not necessarily satisfied with the outcome, they wish they would have been awarded the work, but when they tell me there was nothing wrong with the process you facilitated, the process was fair. Fortunately for them, they didn't get the work, but that lets me know that I did do something right. It's the legacy I want to leave. So while I'm not going to make everybody happy, I want to be known as someone who represented the city well, the taxpayers well, helped make decisions that were in the best interest of those stakeholders, that we fostered some good and meaningful change, right? We improved processes, efficiencies, reduced redundancies, bureaucracy, and just really improved things, kept the process fair and open and really minimize frustration because I think procurement's a place where people can go and get frustrated. But if we can do our part to, make it, more understandable, more fair, open, less frustrating, I think then that's a legacy I'm okay with leaving behind.
Thank you so much, Nathaniel, for taking the time to grace our podcast and share your wisdom with our listeners. And of course, thank you to everyone who listened to us today. This has been your host, Patricia. And remember, for all your professional, business, and technical writing needs, there's only one way to go, and that's with the right direction. See you guys soon. Thank you again, Nathaniel, and goodbye.